Did you know most people would rather face public humiliation than challenge their family's expectations? I learned that the hard way, the moment I showed up to my sister's wedding, in full military dress. Because the only thing more uncomfortable than breaking tradition, is breaking yourself to fit into it. That was it. No hesitation, no apology, just a flat declaration. Like I was supposed to nod and accept it as truth. And I did nod. Not because I agreed. Not because she was right. I nodded because I'd already learned what happened when I challenged her. When I pushed back. When I dared to take up space in a family that never made room for me to begin with. But something about those words, "You're not pure," cut deeper than anything she'd ever said before. I've taken orders before. From commanding officers. From people who had the power to make or break me. But this wasn't about etiquette or color coordination. This was her looking me in the face and telling me, "You are not worthy. Not good enough. Not clean enough to be seen in white." And what for? Because I didn't follow the script? Because I took a path she didn't understand? Because I saw the world differently, and bled for it? That day, in that perfectly decorated room full of blush linens and polished silver, she reduced me to a symbol. A stain. Something to hide. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already been through fire. I had faced worse than judgmental glances and whispered insults behind champagne flutes. And I didn't survive all that just to fold under a sister's shame. So yes, I nodded. But not out of defeat. Out of calculation. Because what came next, was the part no one expected. My name is Jordan Ellis, and I'm 30 years old. This is the story of how my sister tried to erase who I was on the most important day of her life. And how I showed up anyway. Not in silence. Not in shame. But in a uniform that told the truth. Whether they were ready to hear it or not. On the outside, we were the kind of family people envied. The Ellis home sat on a pristine street in Charleston, South Carolina, a two-story colonial with navy blue shutters and a wraparound porch my father repainted every spring. There was always sweet tea in the fridge, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and a flag waving just right out front. From a distance, we looked like a Southern family straight out of a magazine spread, warm, well-mannered, and put together. But behind the white-painted doors, things were curated. Savannah was born 3 years before me, and from the moment she could smile on cue, she became the standard. She never needed reminders to say, "Yes, ma'am," or "Please," and "Thank you." By age 6, she had a shelf of pageant crowns and a wardrobe that matched my mother's taste exactly, pearls, pleats, and pastels. I, on the other hand, was the unpredictable one. I preferred climbing trees over dance recitals, got grass stains on every Easter dress, and once cut off all my hair with safety scissors just to see what it would feel like. That experiment alone was enough to earn me a month of silence from my mother. At family dinners, Savannah would talk about the honor society and cotillion, and my parents would beam. When I tried to talk about anything remotely different, science fiction books, or why I thought the world was unfair, I'd get that tight-lipped smile from my mother and a subtle shake of the head from my dad. It wasn't outright cruelty. It was something quieter. Polished. Once, at age 11, I asked why Savannah got a new phone and I didn't. My mother didn't raise her voice. She just said, "Because Savannah doesn't make everything harder than it needs to be." Then she went right back to arranging her centerpiece. Every comparison was unspoken, but sharp. Savannah was gentle, graceful, obedient. I was intense. Stubborn. Loud. And even when I tried to meet them halfway, to wear what they wanted, to smile through church service, to sit still through Savannah's piano recitals, it was never enough. Some families nurture individuality. Ours rewarded conformity. And Savannah had perfected the performance. I spent my teenage years learning how to disappear without ever leaving home. And when the time came to choose a path, I didn't ask for permission. I packed my bags and enlisted. Because I knew, I would never be her. And I was tired of apologizing for it. I didn't tell anyone when I walked into the recruiting office. No dramatic announcement. No last-minute plea for attention. Just the quiet shuffle of papers, the sharp scent of floor cleaner, and a recruiter with a buzz cut who looked at me like I had something to prove. Maybe I did. At 17, while my classmates were obsessing over early admissions and SAT scores, I was sitting across from someone explaining the Navy's nuclear propulsion program. I wanted out, but not aimlessly. I wanted purpose. Structure. A place where my stubbornness wasn't a flaw, it was fuel. I waited until the paperwork was signed and my ship date was locked before I told my parents. It was a Thursday night. Savannah had just gotten back from a networking mixer at her college, already working toward her MBA at Vanderbilt. She was glowing with the praise of professors and family friends, the future golden and guaranteed. I waited until the table was cleared. Until the dishes were washed and dried. Then I said it plainly. I've enlisted. I ship out this summer. The silence that followed could have cracked the walls. My mother dropped her fork. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. And Savannah? She didn't even blink. She just sighed and said, "You're throwing your life away." I held her gaze. "No, I'm choosing a life that's mine." Her jaw clenched. "You could have done anything, Jordan. You're smart. You had options. Why waste it playing soldier? It's not playing. It's serving." My mother finally found her voice. "This isn't what we raised you for. You're better than this. You raised me to be like her," I said, nodding toward Savannah. "And I'm not." That night, the distance between us became permanent. Savannah walked out of the room. My mother cried. My father poured himself a drink and said nothing. No one came to my high school graduation. They said they had a family obligation. I didn't ask for details. By then, I'd stopped expecting anything else. Boot camp was hard. But not harder than growing up in a house where love was conditional on performance. I learned quickly how to keep my back straight under pressure, how to shut down tears, how to stand perfectly still when someone was yelling 2 inches from my face. I watched others break. I didn't. Because I had already broken once, and rebuilt myself before I ever put on the uniform. During my first deployment, I sent postcards home. Brief updates. Polite. Distant. Only my father replied. Once. A typed note that said, "Stay safe. We're proud, even if we don't say it." I never knew if he meant it. But I kept the card anyway. Over the years, Savannah and I drifted from occasional texts to complete silence. Her LinkedIn was the only place I knew what she was up to: marketing firm promotions, travel photos with friends who looked like catalog models, engagement to some guy in finance. A polished life. Predictable. Pristine. I didn't envy her. But I did wonder how someone so committed to perfection could still manage to make me feel like the broken one. It arrived in a pale cream envelope, tucked between a VA letter and a furniture store coupon. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a generic wedding invite sent out of obligation. But when I flipped it over, a handwritten note fell out, penned in soft blue ink I recognized immediately. "Jordan, I'd like you to be my maid of honor. I know we haven't been close, but you're still my sister. Love, Savannah." I stared at it for a long time, letting the words sink in like they were written in a language I hadn't heard in years. Savannah, reaching out. After years of cold birthdays and one-line holiday texts, after a decade of polite avoidance, she wanted me at the center of her wedding? Not just attending, standing beside her. I wish I could say I felt joy. Relief. Excitement. But what I felt first was suspicion. Was this real? I reread the note a dozen times, searching for subtext. Was she trying to heal something? Or was this just for show, another checkbox to satisfy someone else's version of what a family should look like? I sat on my worn-out couch in my tiny apartment outside Seattle, staring at the RSVP card like it held more weight than any deployment briefing I'd ever had. Eventually, I picked up the phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Jordan. Her voice was lighter than I remembered. Hey, I said. I got your invitation. A pause. Right. I wasn't sure if you'd call. Are you sure you meant to ask me? Maid of honor is a pretty central role. I know, she said quickly. It's not just about tradition. I mean, yeah, Ryan's family values appearances, and they expect the sister to be part of the wedding party, but it's more than that. I raised an eyebrow even though she couldn't see me. Is it? She hesitated, and in that pause, I heard the old Savannah creeping back, the one who calculated every word. Look, she said, we've had our differences. But I don't want to start this chapter of my life with you on the sidelines. I'm trying, Jordan. Trying. It wasn't exactly an apology. But it wasn't nothing. Maybe it was the way she said it, measured, but not cold. Maybe it was the fact that she even picked up the phone. Maybe I just wanted to believe her. I leaned back, pressing the phone between my cheek and shoulder. All right. I'll come. But I'm not wearing pink sequins, and I won't carry a bouquet with fake butterflies in it. She laughed. Actually laughed. Deal. I didn't say it aloud, but in that moment, I let something soften. I booked my flight that night. Requested leave for 2 weeks. Dug out the one dress I owned that didn't make me feel like I was in costume. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine what it might look like to show up, not as a soldier, not as the outcast, but just as her sister. Of course, I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Because Savannah didn't just want her sister. She wanted a version of me that never existed. And the wedding? It wasn't about us healing. It was about appearances. Only I didn't realize that, until it was much too late. When I landed in Charleston 2 weeks before the wedding, the humidity hit me like a wall. Thick, clinging, familiar. The airport hadn't changed much since I'd last been home, just enough to feel foreign. I stepped into the arrivals lane in jeans and a navy hoodie, duffel slung over my shoulder, hoping the week ahead might feel like something close to a truce. Savannah picked me up herself, which I took as a good sign. She was driving a white Lexus SUV now, all leather interior and subtle luxury. Her makeup was flawless even at 10 a.m., and she smelled like money, floral, expensive, and clean. She hugged me, stiffly but not cold, and smiled like we were old friends catching up instead of sisters cautiously orbiting around years of silence. It's really good to see you, she said. You too, I replied, and mostly meant it. Her house, well, Ryan's house, was straight out of a bridal magazine. Neutral tones. Matching monograms. Not a single coffee cup out of place. A curated space, just like the version of life she had perfected. That night, they hosted a small dinner at the country club for the families to get acquainted. I wore the only dress I owned that didn't have epaulets or a name patch, navy blue, knee-length, modest. I thought it was safe. Apparently not. Eleanor, Ryan's mother, barely masked her disapproval. So you're military? She asked, as if she couldn't quite place the species. Navy, I said, extending a hand. 8 years now. How interesting. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Howard, Ryan's father and a federal judge, looked at me like I was someone he might sentence in court. They asked no questions about deployments, training, or leadership. Just changed the subject to wine pairings and centerpiece logistics. Savannah didn't defend me. She smiled, nodded, and kept the wine flowing. I let it slide. One night, I told myself, don't start a fire. But it didn't stop there. At the bridal boutique, where Savannah had scheduled fittings for all the bridesmaids, I walked in 5 minutes early and was still greeted like I was interrupting a private club. Savannah's sorority sisters, blonde, polished, carbon copies, smiled with the same careful sweetness you'd give a houseguest you weren't sure would steal the silver. "This is my sister, Jordan," Savannah announced, as if clarifying some mystery. "Oh. Thank you for your service," one of them chirped. "Ashley, or maybe Brooke." "Yeah," said another, "we were worried you might be, deployed." "Nope," I said, lips tight. "Not this time." The bridesmaid dresses were blush pink. Off-shoulder. Floor length. I looked like a melted crayon in mine. When I stepped out of the fitting room, Savannah frowned. "We'll need to do something about your posture," she said, circling me like a stylist. "You stand like like a soldier. Can you soften up a bit? I can stand straight or I can fall over. Pick one." She ignored the jab. "Also, the scars. Maybe sleeves? Or a shawl?" I glanced down at my right shoulder. The scar wasn't large, but visible. A memory etched in skin. I didn't flinch. "I can wear a wrap if that makes you more comfortable." "Not me," she said quickly. "It's just, some people might not understand." I nodded, but inside, something cracked. That night, I found myself standing in front of the guest room mirror, trying to tuck my shoulders inward. Trying to look less military. Less me. The real wound wasn't from what she said. It was from how she said it. Casual. Unapologetic. Like I was just a problem to style around. I wasn't being invited in, I was being sanded down to fit. But I kept showing up. To the tastings. To the seating chart meetings. To the rehearsal prep where no one looked me in the eye unless they had to. Because I told myself I came to build a bridge. Even if she only gave me enough rope to hang from. It all came to a head the night before the rehearsal dinner. I was in the dining room, helping my mom place name cards at each setting. Savannah had assigned seats, of course, organized by family tier, social standing, and dietary preference. The air smelled faintly of polish and peonies. My mother was unusually quiet, which should have been my first warning. Then Savannah came in like a gust of controlled chaos, heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, holding her phone like it had personally offended her. "Did you tell Claire you're wearing a cream dress tomorrow night?" she snapped. I looked up from the name cards. "I said I brought a dress. I didn't give a Pantone code." Savannah crossed her arms. "It's close to white, Jordan. You know you're not supposed to wear white to the rehearsal dinner. Or the brunch. Or anything pre-wedding." I stared at her, confused. "It's not white. It's called ecru. And it's literally the only other dress I brought besides the one for the ceremony." Savannah's voice dropped, but her tone cut like glass. "It's not about the exact color. It's the implication." I blinked. "What implication?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. Then she said it. "You're not pure." The words landed in the middle of the room like a grenade. My hand froze above a place card. My mom stiffened beside me and suddenly found great interest in reorganizing the silverware. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I asked, my voice low and steady. Savannah lifted her chin, clearly doubling down. "You know what I mean. White is symbolic. Tradition matters. And, your choices don't exactly reflect purity." I finished for her, stunned. She nodded once. "This wedding is meant to be elegant, respectful. Reflective of the values we were raised with." I stood there for a long second, heartbeat pounding in my ears. Not because I was embarrassed. But because I wasn't. Not anymore. "I served 8 years in the Navy," I said quietly. "I've led convoys through combat zones, I've dragged injured men out of burning vehicles, and I've held the hands of dying friends. And not once, has anyone questioned my character as brutally as my own sister just did in our childhood home." Savannah flinched. But said nothing. "I'll change the damn dress," I added. "But don't confuse my silence with shame. That's your burden. Not mine. Then I left the house. The local Marriott wasn't fancy, but it had walls that didn't breathe judgment. I dropped my overnight bag on the bed and sat heavily beside it, staring at my reflection in the TV's black screen. I didn't cry. Instead, I unzipped the garment bag I'd packed as insurance. I hadn't told anyone I'd brought it, not my mother, not even myself if I'm honest. Inside was my Navy service dress uniform. Dark blue jacket. Rank insignia. Ribbons. Sharp lines and hard-earned honor. I pulled it out gently, laying it flat across the bed like it was something sacred. In a way, it was. Every thread of it had been earned in grit and heat and sacrifice. It didn't whisper tradition, it declared truth. That night, I pressed it. Polished the shoes. Checked the brass. And made a decision. I'd still show up for Savannah. I wouldn't ruin her day. But I would not contort myself into a version of sisterhood that erased me. The next morning, I rose before the sun. Showered in silence. Pinned my hair back. Removed the hair extensions Savannah insisted on. Wiped off the layers of concealer and blush. Dressed slowly, methodically, muscle memory from years of inspections. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself. Jordan Ellis. Staff Sergeant. Navy veteran. Woman who would not be diminished. I folded the blush bridesmaid dress neatly and laid it on the hotel desk. Then I zipped up my uniform, squared my shoulders, and walked out the door. Not to make a statement. But to stop being erased. The morning of the wedding arrived like a curtain rising on a stage that had been rehearsed for months. The skies were clear, the humidity low, the air heavy with jasmine and expectation. I showed up at the bridal suite at exactly 7 a.m., my Navy service dress uniform pressed to perfection, my hair tied back in a clean, regulation bun. In one hand, I carried a garment bag containing the blush bridesmaid dress. In the other, the weight of everything I had decided the night before. The room was buzzing, stylists with curling irons, makeup artists flitting between bridesmaids, trays of champagne already half empty. Savannah was in the center of it all, radiant in her custom lace gown, laughing a little too brightly. As I stepped inside, the room froze. Claire, one of Savannah's oldest friends and now one of the bridesmaids, was the first to speak. "Is that your uniform?" I nodded. "It is." Savannah turned, her eyes landing on me like heat-seeking missiles. "Jordan," she said slowly, her voice tight. "What are you wearing?" "I told you I'd be here," I replied evenly. "And I am. As myself." Savannah blinked, stunned into silence for the first time in, maybe ever. Then the reactions came in waves. Brooke and Ashley, the sorority twins, traded wide-eyed looks behind their champagne flutes. Claire looked down at her manicured hands, suddenly fascinated by her cuticles. Savannah took a breath. "Jordan, I asked you to be part of this wedding. I asked you to stand beside me. This," she gestured at my uniform, "this feels like a protest." "It's not," I said. "It's a boundary. I asked you not to wear white," she snapped. "And now you show up like a headline?" My mother, who had just walked in with a fresh bouquet of hydrangeas, nearly dropped the vase. "Oh, Jordan," she whispered. My father appeared behind her, falling silent the moment he saw me. His posture shifted, stiffened. Not with disapproval, but something closer to recognition. Savannah stepped closer. "You can't walk down the aisle in that. Not in front of Ryan's family. Not in front of the guests. You're making this about you." I shook my head. "No. I'm making it about not disappearing." The room went quiet again, that vacuum kind of quiet where everyone is breathing but no one dares speak. "You have two choices," Savannah said, her voice dropping. "Change into the dress, or step down as my maid of honor." A long silence stretched out between us. I looked at her, my sister, the girl who once braided my hair before school, who built pillow forts with me on stormy nights, who now couldn't look past a uniform to see the woman wearing it. Then I exhaled slowly. Then I'm stepping down. Savannah's face crumpled, not with sadness, but fury. Fine. Claire will take your place. Brooke will shift left. It's still symmetrical. And that was it. No apology. No understanding. Just adjustments. I turned to leave. But just before I reached the door, I heard my father's voice. "Jordan," he said. I turned. He stepped forward, examined the ribbons on my chest, the bronze star, the purple heart. His hand hovered for a second, then rested gently over the medals. "You wore this with honor. You walk into this room with honor." Then he looked at Savannah. "And if that's not welcome here, that says more about this day than anything she's wearing." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I simply nodded, stepped out of the suite, and made my way to the church. Not as a maid of honor, but as myself. The ceremony passed like a watercolor dream, soft edges, muted sounds. I watched it from the third row, seated beside my Aunt Meredith and cousin Leah, both of whom gave me quiet, reassuring smiles when I arrived in uniform. Leah even whispered, "You look badass," before the music started. It helped more than she knew. Savannah didn't glance my way once during the vows. Her expression was composed, elegant, exactly as she'd planned. And when she walked back down the aisle as Mrs. Ryan Whittaker, her train sweeping behind her like a royal decree, I wondered if she felt any of what I did: regret, relief, grief for a version of us that had never really existed. The reception was held in the country club ballroom, all blush roses and gold accents, a string quartet humming near the stage. I kept to the edges, speaking with distant relatives, accepting compliments from people who didn't know what had happened upstairs. It was fine. I hadn't come for applause. About halfway through dinner, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Savannah, still in her gown, eyes glossy but not from champagne. She tilted her head. "Can we talk?" I nodded, and she led me out onto the patio, where the music faded into the background and cicadas hummed beyond the garden hedges. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she said, "You embarrassed me." "I know," I said. "But I didn't do it to hurt you." Savannah wrapped her arms around herself. "When you walked in wearing that uniform, all I could think was what people would say. What they'd assume." I looked at her carefully. "What did you assume, Savannah?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she admitted, "I was scared. That if you showed up like that, they'd see how different we are. That they'd question how someone like me came from someone like you." I waited. Let the silence stretch. She exhaled sharply. "But then Uncle Henry came over to our table, told me he hadn't cried at a wedding since Vietnam, and thanked me for having you there. And Dad," she shook her head. "I've never seen him look at anyone like that. Not even me." I didn't say anything. "I was always jealous," she said softly. "Of how sure you are. Of how you live without asking for permission." "That certainty came with a price," I replied. "And I'm still paying it." She nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm sorry. For all of it. For making you feel like you had to hide who you are. For calling you," she swallowed. "For that thing I said about purity. That wasn't fair. It wasn't true." "No, it wasn't," I said, not unkindly. Savannah looked up at me. "So, where do we go from here?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "We start over. Not as the perfect daughters. Just as sisters. Flawed, different, and still trying." A pause. "Deal," she said, and for the first time in years, she hugged me like she meant it. No cameras. No choreography. Just the truth between us. The morning after the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table of my parents' house, still in my uniform pants and a worn t-shirt, sipping black coffee from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Daughter." It made me smile, for the first time in a long time, without defense. My dad walked in, freshly shaved, still in his pressed pajamas like it was Sunday tradition. He poured himself a cup, then sat across from me without saying a word for a full minute. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I looked up what those ribbons meant last night," he said. "Didn't know, not really." I nodded, letting him have the space. "You never talk about it," he added. "Because no one ever asked," I said, gently. "Not really." He looked down, then back up at me. "I'm asking now." And that, after years of silence, of trying to decode pride through glances and tight-lipped nods, meant everything. Later that afternoon, Savannah stopped by before leaving for her honeymoon. Ryan waited outside in their Uber, bags in the trunk, itinerary perfectly laminated in her hand, of course. But before she left, she hugged me again, longer this time. "We're starting fresh, remember?" she whispered. "Flawed, different, and still trying," I said back, smiling. And just like that, the wall we'd spent years building between us cracked a little more. Weeks passed. Then months. I went back to Seattle, to my job at the base, my tiny apartment, my life. But something inside had shifted. I wasn't trying to earn their approval anymore, I had reclaimed something deeper. Myself. Savannah sent care packages for the first time ever, ridiculous things, like lavender bath bombs and fancy teas with passive-aggressive notes, "Relax. You've earned it." And on Christmas, she handed me an envelope across the fireplace and said, "We want you to be the godmother." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She beamed. "I'm pregnant. We're telling family today. I wanted you to know first." And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, not as a shadow, not as a sacrifice, but as a sister. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local high school's career day. I wore my uniform, not for show, but because it's part of me now, the same way my scars are. The same way my choices are. A student raised her hand after my talk and asked, "Was it worth it? All the sacrifice?" I paused, looked out at a room full of faces still trying to decide who they were. And I said, yes. Because I stopped living for anyone else's version of me. I stopped shrinking. And when I did, something incredible happened. I became someone even my family had to learn to respect. Then I added, the hardest part isn't surviving boot camp. It's surviving being misunderstood by the people who were supposed to know you best. So here's what I've learned, what I want you to take away, whether you wear a uniform or not. Your worth isn't measured by how well you fit in. It's measured by how bravely you stand out, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because there will be moments when being true to yourself costs something. And there will be moments when it earns you everything.